the
I'm excited.
I'm excited too. It's great to see you.
Anna, you're going to let us know when to start recording, correct?
Yeah, so just when Jasmine is ready to go, we can start recording. Thank you everyone who is joining right now. We are going ahead and go ahead and get started in about 2 minutes. We are waiting on one of our interpreters. Gracias pues bienvenidos al entrenamiento de hoy. Ahorita vamos a empezar en como 2 minutos. Si necesitan interpretación, hay un símbolo de un mundo, está a la derecha de la mano. Si le hagan clic ahí, ahí se puede accesar la interpretación en español. If you need interpretation, there is a symbol, world symbol right next to the hand on the right side of it, and you can click on that one and access interpretation.
Anna, should I share my screen or is how...
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, that would be great.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yes, Kui, I can hear you. I will be recording in Vietnamese, so I will be hearing you.
Jasmine, are you able to show your screen? Oh, okay, good. I just want to make sure it was nothing on my end.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how to do this. Are you able to see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Great, just give us the green light, and I think Anwar or what's starting us off.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, Anwad. How's it going?
Hi, Anna. How's it going? How are you guys?
Good, thanks. Thank you for helping us out today. We're gonna go ahead and get started now. I do see that Wikuan is here, and that means that all our interpreters are here. So if you need interpretation, please click on the symbol right next to the raise hand symbol. It's the one that looks like a globe. You can click on the different interpreters that are available. We have Vietnamese, Cantonese, and today. If you need support accessing interpretation or a different language, please feel free to request it over chat. I'll go ahead and try to help you. But yes, go ahead and kick us off, Anwar. Thank you so much for your support.
Absolutely no problem. I don't usually wear a tie to these, but I just got done with a hearing literally 5 minutes ago. So here I am. I like this to be casual, but I also want this to be very valuable for everyone. And also, as a point of consideration for the interpreters, I'm going to speak a little bit slower. That said, this is a business law basics presentation. We possibly couldn't cover everything, but Jasmine and I are going to cover what we think are perhaps really pertinent elements of basic law for entrepreneurs. Congratulations on thinking about starting your own business and for moving forward with it. A lot of people they dream about it, they think about it, they talk about it, but they never do it. So congratulations on that. My name is Anwar Ramirez. I am a business law attorney in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in San Francisco, and my office is in Oakland. And Jasmine?
Thank you so much, Anwar. Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Poyawan. I'm one of the program directors of the Economic Justice Practice of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the San Francisco Bay Area. Just want to thank all of my colleagues, especially Anna, for setting up this great series for immigrant-owned small businesses. We are on day 2, and I'm just looking forward to presenting. It's an honor to co-present with Anwar, and really looking forward to sharing information, but also getting to know all of you who are in attendance. If you have the opportunity to, we'd love to just hear from you in the chat what kind of business you currently operate, maybe what city you operate in, and if you have a question that you are hoping to get answered today. Hopefully our presentation will answer that question by the end of it, but if not, we hope to give ample time for question and answer portion at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to just start off with a big disclaimer first, is that nothing in this conversation or this presentation should be considered as legal advice. Anwar and I are simply sharing information and sharing our experiences as transactional attorneys. Our workshop does not create an attorney-client relationship. However, if you are looking to create an attorney-client relationship and looking to find an attorney, we have services as well through our organization, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We are a civil rights organization. We were founded in 1968, and our mission is really to promote and protect the legal rights of communities of colors, low-income people, immigrants, and refugees. We do this by providing direct services, impact litigation, and we also advocate for public policies. So if you would like to learn more about our services, we have specific services for entrepreneurs through our Legal Services for Entrepreneurs program, or LSC. It's an economic justice project founded in 1997, and our whole goal is to provide free transactional legal services to low-income individuals starting their businesses or those investing in economically distressed communities. And so we do this through our workshops, which we have today, our clinics and consultations, which you're able to sign up for the next one on November 2nd, as well as matching with attorneys, pro bono volunteers from law firms that we partner with. And so this is just a little background on us before we start with the presentation. But before I do that, Anwar, was there anything you wanted to share about your services or your firm?
No, I mean, I really am just doing this to empower communities who usually wouldn't have access to it. I know that oftentimes we feel intimidated about speaking with attorneys or about the law, and this is a way to sort of demystify that and to just give you a nice segue into the next step of your business. But other than that, that's really my role here. This is not in any way a plug for my business or anything like that. Yeah, but thank you.
Thanks. Anwar is just our very great, humble, and kind pro bono volunteer here. And so we're really looking forward to presenting and answering your questions. And I see some folks have put in the chat about their businesses and where they're located. See someone all the way from Washington, D.C., also from Visalia and Oakland. Welcome, welcome. So with that, what are we going to learn today? We're going to go over a really quick overview of choosing a business entity and what are some considerations. Honestly, you can talk, or we can talk about this at length, but we really are going to give a broad overview so that you are aware of what your options are. And then we're going to talk about contracts and employment laws that are very important to consider when you are a small business owner, because we really firmly believe in not just starting businesses just for the sake of starting them, but really empowering and ensuring that entrepreneurs know how to successfully maintain their business and make sure that it's legally compliant in order to be sustainable for the long run. And so at the end of the presentation, we will provide some resources and then jump right into our Q&A. So going over to choosing a business entity, you're going to start with just looking at the kind of the options that you have. And so before I jump into this, I think it's really important to state that business entities or corporate law or the type of businesses you're able to start vary state by state. So to Louis' question about does our organization provide services nationwide? We provide information that is obviously available nationwide, but because we're licensed in California, our information that we provide is relevant for California businesses. And so if you're outside of California, the advice is to consult the state or an attorney who is licensed in the state that you are starting a business in, as business laws vary state by state. But in general, each state follows very similar types of structures. Obviously, there are some variances across different states. But here in California, we have this Venn diagram. So in the orange part, these are your default business entities. So let's say you were just to start your business and not file any paperwork with the state, then you are by default either a sole proprietor or a general partnership. The difference there is if you are the sole owner of your business, you are a sole proprietor. But if, let's say, you're in partnership with a friend, with a family member, with a spouse, then technically the state will look at you as being in a general partnership. On the right, if you were to fill out and submit forms with the Secretary of State, you do have options to choose. It's a different type of entities here. There are more entities outside of this, like more specifics, but we'll just talk about the general ones. You have the limited liability company. It's a very popular LLC. Corporations, which could either be considered, you will hear it say C Corp or S Corp. Those are just basically how the corporation is being taxed, but we will use those phrases as the presentation goes on. You have the option of a cooperative corporation, which we'll talk about. There's a benefit corporation, which we won't get into today, but if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. You have a limited partnership and limited liability partnership. And what's the benefit of registering with the Secretary of State? Well, on the bottom here of the Venn diagram, the orange, or the ones in the orange, you have more risk to your personal assets than if you were to register the Secretary of State. You would have less risk to your personal assets because you're essentially creating a separate entity, separate from yourself. So the only assets that will be at risk if, let's say, your business flounders or you get sued in a lawsuit, only the business's assets will be at risk most of the time, generally speaking. So that is what we refer to as legal liability, which is the first thing you should consider, whether you need a business entity or whether, like, and how do you choose one. If you're worried about your personal assets, then maybe it is in your benefit to then form a separate business entity and file paperwork with the Secretary of State. You also want to consider how you want to share your management and the ownership of your business. Asking yourself which entity type will allow me to own and manage my business in the best way possible. Let's, for instance, if you were to solicit funding from investors, thinking through what are some ways you could form a business entity to retain your ownership of your business, but still gain investments from outside funders. That is a big consideration. And the last consideration we'll talk about today are also the taxes and fees that are involved in starting particular entity types. Before I move on, did you want to add anything, Anwar?
Yeah, just one thing, Jasmine. If you go back to the previous slide, please.
Mhm.
So there's this inherent sort of push lately that I've been seeing for people to register their business as an LLC or a corp, or everyone wants to sort of legitimize, right, the business with some kind of registration. The only thing I would say is I know people who they've started a business. What is the definition of a business? Is you start a business when you sell a service or a profit in exchange for money. As soon as you start doing that, you are literally running a business, and you are recognized as a sole proprietor. If you do that with someone else, it's a general partnership. But I know people who have run a sole proprietor without registering their business as an LLC or corporate for many, many years, decades. They never have one that's been sued, and there's never been any issue with that. This is a very unique sort of decision to you. It's unique to you. So when you are thinking about any of these, just, you can talk to someone, whether it's a lawyer or an accountant or someone who's going to give you some real value advice as to your specific circumstances now and where you plan on being in 5 years or in 15 years. That's all I would say. But you should not feel pressure to register your business as an LLC or C Corp just because people are doing it. That's all.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Anwar, for sharing that. That's definitely, I share in that sentiment. There's nothing wrong with just being a sole proprietor or just being a general partnership. It really depends on your specific circumstances. So with that, I want to make sure that everyone understands the concept of legal liability and what it means to have limited liability versus unlimited liability. Now, if we recall from that Venn diagram, if you're just a sole proprietor or a general partnership, you technically have what's called unlimited liability, meaning business creditors and lawsuits can reach your personal assets, such as a house or a car. But the moment you file and create either a corporation, limited liability company, limited partnership, then you have what's called limited liability, which limits your liability to business creditors and lawsuits only to the assets that belong to the business. In most cases, business creditors and lawsuits cannot reach your personal assets as owners. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest benefits that people are drawn to when they consider evolving from a sole proprietorship or a partnership. But again, as Anwar mentioned, it's not the only consideration. And oftentimes there are businesses out there who have been operating as sole proprietorships or partnerships for years without having any issue with unlimited liability. So ownership and management structure, the basics. Again, this is just a broad overview, but I want just to summarize the main, I think the most popular types of business entities or most common that we've come across in our work here at Lawyers Committee, and also the most I think useful ones to know, the most common. And so one of the most common structures is a limited liability company, or LLC. And so when you think about the LLC, thinking about its ownership and management structure is that LLCs are owned by its members. And so they're not necessarily called shareholders, although you can structure an LLC to have shareholders. That's the draw of an LLC, is that it's very flexible. But at its basic core, LLCs are owned by members, and members can also act as managers. You can have members be managers who have decision-making power in the company or in the LLC, and they can have decisions and manage the day-to-day. LLCs are very flexible in the sense that they are governed by what are called operating agreements. We always advise to have these agreements in writing because these agreements will basically determine who are members, who are eligible to be members, who then are managers, or who has the decision-making power. So essentially draws out all of the ownership and management structure in one document or contract that is signed by all of the members. And so that's why I think the LLC is very, very attractive in that sense. Similarly, a partnership can be structured in a very similar way, although with partnerships, the partners do have unlimited liability. There is something called the limited partnership, where you can structure a partnership in having one partner just putting in money to the partnership, but not having the liability, the personal liability to the business. And that's getting a little into the weeds, but if you find yourself in a situation where, let's say you have a business partner who doesn't want to have any management or ownership rights to the business, but would like to invest or provide money to the business, then that perhaps is something you would want to explore. And similar to an LLC, partnerships are governed by what are called partnership agreements, which again are basically just contracts laying out all of the ownership and management agreements. The next one is corporations. Corporations have directors and officers in a board of directors that have decision-making power. So shareholders in corporations have power in the sense that they oftentimes are able to elect the board or determine how the board is made up. But the board of directors have the decision-making power over the corporation and the company. Unlike LLCs and partnerships, there's a little bit more formality with corporations. You have more documents, or there are more things to abide by under the law. You have to file what are called bylaws, which are just like operating agreements and partnership agreements, just a little different in the sense that they are structured closely to fit all of the rules and regulations around corporations and their decision making. And then lastly here we have cooperatives, which aren't super common, but in our with our mission to support communities and to support economic justice, we have seen many clients or individuals looking to start cooperatives, specifically worker-owned cooperatives, in which the workers themselves have ownership of the business. So they're members of the cooperative. They have one vote, so it's very democratic. Your vote is not based on how much money you put in the company, but it's usually based on how many hours you work as a worker. Distributions or money that you get paid out by the cooperative is also usually based on the number of hours you've worked versus the amount of shares you hold in the company. And so a cooperative can be a corporation, or it can be a limited liability company structured as a cooperative, and depending on what type of entity you choose, you either have bylaws, articles of incorporation, or operating agreements if you choose LLCs. Again, this is just a broad overview, a little over my time speaking about this, because you can talk about this for a while, but if any of these entity structures stand out to you and you have specific questions, we're happy to address them in Q&A. Before I move on, Anwar, did you want to add anything to this slide?
No, thank you, Jasmine. I think you're going to hear a lot about LLCs and partnerships and corps, but a really unique sort of structure that I think Jasmine can touch on is cooperatives, which are worker-owned. Basically, it's a worker-owned business. That's all. And I think we're going to talk about that later, right, Jasmine?
Yes.
Cool.
So when you're trying to think of your ownership and management structure, you want to think about who are the owners of your business. How do the owners want to be involved in the business? Do they want to be hands-on? Do they just want to lend money? Also, since this is a workshop for immigrant-owned businesses, oftentimes people don't know this, but you can also be an owner of a business even if you do not have work authorization here in the United States. So there is no requirement for work authorization to start a business, but note that starting a business does not change a person's immigration status. And so we won't go into depth about this in this presentation, but I think the presentation after hours will talk a little bit more about how to run a business or how to own a business as an immigrant without work authorization or as an ITIN holder. Other important tips is to clarify who does what jobs in the company and then to formalize the management relationships. Like I said, get things in writing, either in an operating agreement, partnership agreement, or bylaws, depending on the type of entity you choose. Getting everything in writing is very important. We'll talk more about that while we discuss contracts. I'm going to kind of skim through this because this is information that's available on the California Secretary of State website. But I just wanted to give an overview on fees and taxes. So there are taxes and fees associated with filing your paperwork with the Secretary of State in order to officially create a separate business entity. As you see, they range from $70 up to $100, as well as yearly statements of information that cost about $25 to file. The one thing is that there is a minimum franchise tax. So all business entities that were in the green part of the Venn diagram in the first slide are charged a minimum of $800 a year. Sole proprietors are not charged this minimum franchise tax. So going back to Anwar's great point is that sometimes it's beneficial for certain businesses to not file paperwork with the Secretary of State and to just remain a sole proprietor due to the minimum franchise tax. So again, it's really an individual consideration of your individual circumstances, but be aware that there are fees and taxes associated with filing to become a business entity that has limited liability. All right. We're going to talk a little, oh, sorry, was that something?
Sorry. Yes, I wanted to just point out there's a couple questions in the chat and also in the Q&A. I think there's one about, can I lend money to my LLC to start it up from my personal account without being taxed?
That's a good question. We will we'll save that for the Q&A later. I do see your questions, and so we'll get through the presentation and then address the questions as we receive them at the end, if that's okay. But thank you for your question.
I mean, that is a good question. It does have several layers to that question, but the short answer, and we will get to this, is the short answer is yes, you can, and then you would have to consider if you have any distributions or any allocations, and those are questions for your accountant. So it can be a little more complicated than that. You're basically, what you're doing is you're either loaning to the LLC or you're providing startup costs, which is two different questions. But we can talk about that later. But let's definitely hold on that. I'm gonna keep that on the board. Thank you, Jasmine.
Awesome. Yeah, that is a great question, and luckily this kind of addresses that in a little bit. This slide doesn't address it completely, but it kind of goes into what Anwar was talking about. It really depends on various factors. So in terms of how different entities are taxed, I know this table has a lot on it, but let's just think through two types of taxation. So there's what's called pass-through taxation, and then called double taxation. And so pass-through taxation is what you would see in a sole proprietorship or even a partnership or limited liability company where the company is taxed on their income once. So let's say your LLC makes a profit of 10,000 a year. The LLC gets taxed on that $10,000. But let's say as a business owner, you are paid out from that $10,000 a distribution. Let's say you get paid out $5,000 of that. A lot of people ask, well, do I have to pay 5,000 or do I have to pay taxes on that $5,000? And the answer is no. If it's from if you've already paid those taxes through your LLC. That's not the case with a corporation that is taxed as a C Corp. And again, this is where the distinction between C Corp and S Corp is. S Corp, you do have the pass-through taxation, but with a C Corp, you're taxed twice. So the income that a corporation makes, let's say that $10,000, you're taxed on it, the corporation is taxed on it, but let's say the corporation then distributes $5,000 to you as a shareholder. As a shareholder, you will also have to pay taxes on that money that you receive. So this gets a little complicated depending on your tax situation, but as Anwar said, if our best advice is to speak to a tax professional and really get your individual situation looked at closely, as different things and different tax laws can affect the outcome of your situation.
I mean, I mean, maybe we can just answer this now.
Sure.
If you make a loan to your LLC, remember that LLC is considered a separate entity. It's a separate person, considered a separate person. I think the government has even decided that a corporation is a person. So when you're making a loan, make sure you have the paperwork drawn up, and you have to charge at least at least some kind of interest. And we've done this before, and effectively what it is, you want to make it look like it's an actual loan. If you don't, and you just put money into the LLC, it can be considered a contribution, which if you have other members, it increases your ownership in the LLC. So you want to make sure that it's actually documented as a loan and it's kept in some kind of paper and in some kind of archive, like some kind of database to show, including where your operating agreement is. Wherever all the paperwork lives, that's where you want to show. And it will also help you avoid piercing the corporate veil down the road because you did everything by the book. And all it is, it's a loan agreement. You lent the LLC money and they're going to pay you back, and they're going to pay you back in according to a payment schedule. That's it. So I think that answers it.
Yes, thank you, Anwar. And the phrase that Anwar used about piercing the corporate veil, it's very important if you have a separate business entity to not commingle personal funds and the funds of the business, as this can be grounds for a court finding that there's no difference between you and the business, and that your personal assets you should be liable, or you can personally be liable. And that's the one exception I had mentioned earlier, that it's generally true that you have limited liability with a business entity that you create, although there are exceptions to that rule. But just moving forward, I'm going to skip on the specific tax information. Again, I think it's best to speak to a tax professional or seek a consultation on your specific circumstance, as taxes are very individualized. This is, again, the concept I was explaining about double taxation. But before, I guess, as we're running out of time, I'm going to start on contracts, which, again, once you choose your business entity, you will be required to create a contract. It will either be an operating agreement, called an operating agreement, a partnership agreement, or bylaws. Contract is essentially just a promise or a set of promises that are enforceable in courts. It is true that an operating agreement and partnership agreements can, not so much the bylaws, but operating agreement and partnership agreements can be oral and can be found to be like verbal agreements. But we always advise, and we always, from our personal experience, share that written agreements are best practice. They're best practice because you never know when people's memories might differ or change, or relationships can go wrong. A lot of different things can happen. And it's also easier to prove the contents of a contract when they're in writing. It's also easier to have someone review the contracts and shows the clear intent of the parties entering into those contracts. So again, have your contracts in writing. Next slide here is just what formal contracts are typically used for, what we advise our clients to have formal contracts for is if you have a business where you have clients, it's really important to have a client contract. Really important to have sales contracts for your vendors, or having purchase agreements if you sell goods or services. To hire employees, it's always really good to have your offer letters and employment agreements in writing, which we'll talk about when we discuss employees. Same goes for independent contractors, potential partners, business entity formation, and then capital providers or funding investors. Especially if someone is putting money into your business, you want to have that in writing in terms of what that money gives them in exchange in terms of their rights and responsibilities. I will get back to you on that question, Louis, but there are business contract templates available. We have some resources at the end of the presentation. So contract terms, well, one big contract that wasn't mentioned, I should have added it on, is if you are a brick and mortar shop, a big contract is commercial lease. So renting your space, that is a service that we provide pretty often here at LCR, reviewing commercial leases, advising on commercial leases, and not just commercial leases, but all contracts. You've come up with kind of these principles of asking yourself, does your contract clearly describe your obligations and the other parties' obligations? If there's payment involved, does it describe the payment terms? Does it describe the time frame of the agreement? Does it describe how to change the agreement or how to end the agreement? And does it describe how to resolve disputes and conflicts? And that's really important to make sure you review or have an attorney review to ensure that you're protecting yourself from all the different possibilities. Yep, these are just basics, making sure you read the contract and really understanding that the contract must be legal. A contract is not enforceable if it's contracting around something that is unlawful or against the law. Other tips, avoiding ambiguous terms. I don't know, Anwar, do you have any tips or things you want to share about contracts before we move on to employment?
Yeah, if you can remember anything that we talk about contracts, just remember a contract is necessary for two things, for clarity and accountability. And whether it's clarity between business partners or between vendors or between employees, you want to make sure that the terms are clear now so that later on when someone says that this was done or wasn't done, you have accountability. You're able to hold that person or that entity accountable for what you agreed on. So clarity, accountability. And one other thing I will say is it doesn't matter if you're going into business with your best friend or your brother or your mom, you need to have the contract in place, a contract in place, just so that I mean, I've seen many different partnerships to solve, and between husband and wife, between brother and sister, between all of it, it could happen in the future. Not to say it's like it's going to happen in your case, but it could happen. So clarity and accountability. That's all I would have to say. And you can basically, to answer the question on Dan D here, Dan D asked a question regarding two scenarios. They're starting an LLC to create a software tools for two separate clients. One of them wants a profit sharing on future deals, and the other one wants 10% equity stake in the business. Are they enforceable? The general question is yes, you can contract out for anything. So as long as it's not illegal or it doesn't violate public policy, and it's like Jasmine said, it's not too vague or it's not too ambiguous, and it's actually enforceable. There's very basic sort of tenets to a contract. There has to be an offer, there has to be acceptance, there has to be consideration. What's consideration? You're trading one thing for another. These are I'm speaking in very simplistic terms, but yes, that's all I have to say, I guess, at this point. And I'll try to answer your question, Dan D, on here as well with what I just said.
So much, Anwar, and also thanks for answering the Q&A. Really appreciate presenting with you.
Of course.
All right, so we're gonna keep going here. Two more slides. This is just redundant. Legal tips for a healthy business. Just use formal contracts, keep good records. Exactly what Anwar was talking about. Just never know when things could go wrong. And as lawyers, we're always trained and prepared or trained to prepare for worst case scenario. And so, we're on that tip of just making sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. So with that said, we're going to move on to a little bit about employment laws. And just want to disclaim that I am not an employment law attorney. I don't think Anwar is either, but it's okay. This is just sort of an overview of what we've seen through our work as obligations that entrepreneurs or business owners, the basic obligations that they should be aware of in order to protect their business, because violating employment laws can lead to a lot of penalties and also other punishments that I've seen in my practice have put businesses under. And so it's very important that we share this information and encourage compliance. So with that said, if you were to hire any employees, and I know not all businesses have employees, and so if this doesn't apply to you yet, maybe you just put a tab on this for future reference. But like with everything, get everything on paper. Every written contract, you want to use offer letters, which includes terms for your employees. By default in California, employment is at will, meaning you can fire an employee at will or at any time for any reason, as long as it's not discriminatory or against the law. And also employees can leave at any time as well. You want to specify whether the terms of employment are salary or hourly, compensation and benefits, non-disclosure agreements if there are anything you don't want disclosed about your business or having the employee, if they leave corporation or business, be able to share in the future with other people. Want to make sure that's all in writing. In addition to having the employment agreement with the specific employees in writing, want to have a general handbook or employee handbook that's in writing that's distributed to all employees in the organization. This is just so that employees are given notice about all of the employment policies and operation policies of your organization. And so that they're given a fair chance and fair shot at performing their employment obligations to the standards that you've set. I know payroll services can be a little pricey, so not everyone can afford payroll services right out the gate. But once you get to a point in your business that you can pay for payroll services, we highly suggested in the sense that it just streamlines the amount of paperwork you have to do and streamlines the process and ensures that your employees are paid and provided their benefits. So before we do that, I guess it's 4:45, little over the time that we set for our agenda, but I just want to make sure that out of this employment discussion that you're left with the distinction between an employee and an independent contractor. Because this is very important given that the Department of Labor has really in the last few years cracked down on misclassification of employees as independent contractors, and has penalized businesses who have misclassified employees as independent contractors. And you might be asking yourself, why would businesses misclassify employees? Well, looking at here, there's some major differences. Independent contractors are not owed benefits, leave, or overtime under employment laws, whereas employees are. But what is the difference between an independent contractor and employee? Well, there's specific tests, and this is just a basic test, but some courts will use other tests if you ever find yourself in a lawsuit. But in general, a company must show, if they are arguing that a worker is an independent contractor, they must show that that person is free from control and direction of the employer, that that person performs work outside the usual course of the employer's business, so it's different from the employer's business, and 3, that they're normally engaged in this independent trade or business. For instance, let's say you are a nonprofit, or let's have a better example. Okay, let's say you're a restaurant and you hire a bookkeeper under contract. You classify the bookkeeper as an independent contractor. You don't control the bookkeeper's hours. You don't control the way they work. So one, they're free from your control and direction. They are performing work outside the usual course of the restaurant. So they're bookkeeping. That's not the course of a restaurant. And they're normally engaged in independent trade or business. Let's say the bookkeeper has its own business, has other clients, and goes from restaurant to restaurant. In that sense, you're likely to be able to argue that that bookkeeper is an independent contractor. And so again, this is one example, but really something that should be very much taken seriously, because if you're found to be misclassifying your worker, that worker could be entitled to back wages, to back pay of overtime, of other benefits. And so it's very important to follow the laws under this. So with that said, just some of the compliance with state and local employment laws. Again, I'm going to skim through this, but if you have employees, you have to make sure you abide by local minimum wage laws, by state overtime laws and rules. There's also state workers' compensation insurance that as an employer, you must carry for your employees. In different cities, like in San Francisco, for instance, there's more laws around providing paid sick leave, providing healthcare, or some level of healthcare insurance. So it's very important to consult with an attorney to ensure that you're following and kind of checking all of the boxes under the employer checklist. And lastly, there is the federal requirement, immigration requirement of being able to provide a Form I-9 for all of your employees. So ensuring that all of your employees have work authorization. Employees, it is against the law for employees to hire, or employers to hire employees who lack work authorization. At the same time, I do want to stress again that although U.S. employers are prohibited from hiring undocumented or folks without work authorization, It isn't, there are no laws prohibiting an undocumented immigrant or an immigrant without work authorization from owning a business. And so there are ways, if you want to work with someone, or if you have an owner, if you're an owner without work authorization, there are ways to structure your business and structure the duties and tasks of each individual to just present that the person working is not an employee, but rather an owner. So I'll leave it there. And again, there will be another discussion at 6 o'clock, talking a little bit more about how to start businesses as an IT holder or a person lacking work authorization. But do want to get us to oh, yeah, this is just if you're going to fire or lay off your workers, you want to make sure you keep a lot of records of performance, have a documented reason for hiring or firing. Again, cannot fire someone if, you know, due to retaliation or due to discrimination. And yeah, I think that's it. I will leave these slides on for resources. I believe the slides will also be shared, but if you have information on how to complete an I-9, if you have employees, there's resources. So NOLO, Small Business Legal Guide, ABA Legal Guide. There are websites too where you can get sample contracts. I know someone was asking about that on here. So I'll leave this on here, but again, these will be emailed out to attendees. So no worries if you can't write them down all at once. But with that, I'll stop talking. I'll pass it to Anwar, and then we can kick off Q&A if there's still any questions on the chat.
Also, just feel free to just speak them out. It's not a big deal. Yeah, I know we covered a lot, but
If there are any questions and someone wants to raise their hand, please go ahead and do so. I can unmute you.
I also like one thing that I like to ask is from people is like, what kind of business you're starting. I see that we have someone who's doing like an estetica in Oakland, which is like I guess like a, I don't know what that means, hair cutting or maybe makeup or something like aesthetics, I guess. But so each business is going to have what I've been seeing. The reason I ask is because what I've been seeing is I'm seeing a trend from working from home and people starting their own business at home. And one additional consideration is, in addition to registering the business with your local city or county, depending on the type of business that you run, you could potentially run it from home or not, because if your home is zoned for that type of business, they will probably allow it. But zoning is important. Zoning is wherever your business is located, that neighborhood is zoned for either residential for a type of business. It could be manufacturing, which involves like heavy machinery, or it can be like retail. So you will often, if you do register your business with the city, definitely consider zoning as well. There is one question, Jasmine. I don't know if you want to feel that.
I'll go ahead and unmute Phyllis.
Yeah, I think Lewis is asking, mind going over setting up a trust for your business?
I'm not, I don't have a lot of experience over that. I do know that a business trust is essentially a legal agreement. Again, another contract. Oh, sorry. Is
Yeah.
Lewis able to speak? Or Anna?
Yeah, maybe have it.
Yes. I unmuted Phyllis. It sounds like we maybe kind of Lewis may also have a question. Yeah. Phyllis,
Yeah,
are you
I have
able
a question.
to? Oh,
Did you
okay.
hear me? Could y'all hear
Yes,
me?
we can hear you. Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So what I have a cleaning business where I run out of my home, a cleaning mobile business. Now when I get contract, do I have to send out a I-9 to each person that hire me? Do I have to submit a service agreement and an I-9 when I'm contracted out?
Yeah, so I'll
Does that make sense?
yeah, so yes, it does. So the question is, do you have to issue an I-9 to every one of your employees? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that depends on whether they're employees or whether they're independent contractors.
They
Uh,
independent contractors too. They sub. I'm subcontract. I'm sub and workout. That'd be subcontract.
yeah, if they're sorry, go
Anwar,
ahead.
sorry, Phyllis, I think maybe I misunderstood the question, but I just want to make sure I reflect it back. But are you asking, if or if you're required to submit forms for yourself um, as a cleaner for every client that you have? Or is it that you have employees that you have or independent contractors working for you?
So it's both. You correct. I have both for the client who hired me and for the ones I hired to do the job.
Okay.
So I go out and get the work from the general contractor. So the general contractor will hire me, then I'll sub the work out to in the other independent contract. So I'm like a lead generation. So I just marry the two.
Mhm.
So would I have to do it both way, I-9 to the sub and the general?
It really depends on, so are the folks that you are subcontracting to, are they your employees?
No, they're independent contractors as well. They're cleaners as well.
Okay, so technically you don't need to provide an I-9 for them unless they are employees. And so if they're independent contractors, but again, be very clear in terms of that they are independent contractors, because sometimes they can be misclassified, or someone can make the argument that they are misclassified. Then the I-9 requirement is not required. And then for you, it sounds like you are also a contractor, and so well, you wouldn't be submitting the I-9 for yourself. It would be your employer submitting the I-9 for you. And so, but it doesn't sound like you're an employee. It sounds like you're a contractor. But yeah, that's best I can answer your question. I hope that helps. I don't know, Anwar, if you wanted to clarify or add more to that.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think there's actually very clear for every USCIS. So I-9 is a USCIS form, basically ensures that the person who you're hiring as an employee is authorized to work, and they have like verification columns like A, B, and C, and they fill it out, and they ask him very explicitly, are you able to legally work in the US? And then they sign it under penalty of perjury and all that jazz, right? But I think Jasmine brings up a really good point. You should probably know the distinction between independent contractor and employee, because, and then I'll give you a perfect example. If I had your business and I'm hiring several people to do cleaning jobs, let's say they're cleaning offices or commercial offices or even homes, and I hire 3 people, and I meet with them and I tell them, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. When you go to these homes, I want you to dress a certain way, and I want you to look professional, and I want you to wear this apron, this specific color apron, and I want you to use this vacuum cleaner and use these like whatever cleaning liquids or cleaning stuff. And then when you show up, you make sure you introduce yourself a certain way, and you're going to show up at this exact time between 3 and 5 p.m. and that's it. That that sounds a lot like an employee versus like I'm going to get you in touch with the house. You're going to give me a commission, and whatever you do after that, like, go do it. I don't even want to, I'll just make sure that you don't have a criminal record, I guess, or something like that. Even then, I don't know. But there's a lot less control with independent contractors than with employees. So that's a really good point. Make sure, first of all, that you don't have too much control over these people. And sometimes a lot of people even expressly put it in the contract. They will say in the contract, you are an independent contractor. That's still not enough. You still have to treat them like an independent contractor. And then after that, then they have to issue like well, it doesn't matter, but the point is, at this point, what I would do is I would make sure that they're an independent contractor, and then you download the form, the USCIS form. It's an I-9, and then there's instructions, very detailed instructions, and that would be USCIS is great about giving very detailed instructions, and you can just follow the instructions as to what to do if they are in fact an employee.
So the W-9 and the I-9 is the same form, or is there a difference between the forms, the W-9 and the I-9? Is that the same form?
No, it's the I-9 is really used to identify whether the employee is, so whether the person is
Oh.
authorized to work in the US.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, if you are eligible for our legal clinics, if you're a business in California, and please go ahead and register for our legal clinic. If you have any more questions, we're happy to help you. We do have interpretation available at all our legal clinics. And you can go, I sent the link over the chat, and you can go ahead and access it there. Anwar and Jasmine, was there anything else that you wanted to share out before we ended? I know we had that question from Liz about trust, but I don't know if we have enough time to go over it. We could also send some resources over email.
Yeah, the trust is, I mean, a trust for your business, a trust is also like it's basically a separate entity. It's like a controlling document that controls where resources will be allocated in case, usually in case something happens, or it's also a way to just keep money in a separate account under different terms. But yeah, I would talk to a probate attorney about that, or maybe a business attorney who does trust, but I would want to know more because there's probably better options than a trust. People don't usually register trust for a business unless they want the business proceeds to go into that trust, but I would want to know more. I don't know.
Thank you, Anna. Jasmine, anything else?
No, just want to thank everyone again for listening and being engaged and asking such great questions. And thank you to my co-presenter Anwar just for being awesome and answering all the questions on the chat. Thank you, Anna, and everybody on the team for setting this up.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Anat. And like I said,
guys.
through the chat, I will be sending a recording of this webinar to folks that have registered, and I will also be sending these presentation slides. So thank you so much for your support today. And we will also be having a webinar on ITIN, and that is also linked in the chat. I'll send that out right now. That one's actually only available in Spanish today. But we will be having other ITIN resources in this series, and you can see the whole schedule in that link. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, Sanwad. Bye-bye.
Bye.